Good morning, everyone. This is James Diamond from Environment and Climate Change Canada and co-chair of the Oil and Gas Subcommittee for GMI. The lobby is still filling up right now, so I know we've got several people who've just joined, but we'll wait a couple of minutes to allow a few more people to join the meeting. Thanks. I'd remind everybody to put themselves on mute while we're waiting. Thanks.
Are you serious? Are they citizens?
Thanks for waiting, everybody. For those who are just joining us, the lobby's still filling up, so we'll wait one more minute. And I think slowing down now, so I think it's worthwhile to start the meeting now, so as not to lose too much time. We've got a very busy meeting today, and a lot of very good speakers to bring a lot of information to this group. Again, my name's James Diamond. I work for Environment and Climate Change Canada, leading the oil and gas team who's been working on methane regulations in Canada. And I'm here today as co-chair of the Oil and Gas Subcommittee for GMI. We are talking today about methane emission measurement and the utility of that for companies and for governments. I'll start with some housekeeping tips to set up how things will work today in terms of this Microsoft Teams system. So I'd ask everybody to remind you to please mute your microphone unless we're engaging later in a Q&A period. If you're participating by phone, *6 will mute your phone. Thanks. We've got a busy agenda today, and I'm going to speak as little as possible to get things running. A series of presentations that Mark Taylor will run through as I hand it off to him. This is the last in a series that we started a year ago following the inability to hold the in-person meeting in Geneva for the Global Methane Forum. And salvo, I think, to the process that we've undertaken for this past year. So quickly, just to remind you who we are and what's happening here. So GMI, International Public-Private Partnership, 45 partner countries, but over 700 project network members, and expecting great participation today, as much from the project network members and the solution providers and users of the information that we provide, as from the partner countries who are driving some of those policies. Next slide. Just to quickly place who we are, where we are. So a steering committee running GMI overall, 3 technical committees, and we are the oil and gas subcommittee, again, made up of partner country delegates officially represented through the committee, and then project network members who participate and support that work. Lastly, just in terms of technical information, just to position what we're talking about here, recognizing the percentage of methane emissions from the oil and gas sector and why we're paying attention to it from a global perspective, and then from a country perspective, depending where you are coming from, you can see even a greater participation from oil and gas emissions in this scan of the contribution from methane to the GHG emissions. I want to remind people, and this will come back at the end, I think, of the Global Methane Challenge under GMI. So this promotion continues. You'll find on the website an opportunity to input information or to look at the information that's posted there for various solutions across the globe. Here's the reference to the website to find that information. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. So worked with Mark from a federal government perspective for many years now. Mark's coming to us from Alberta as a former regulator and a consultant across oil and gas issues, but in particular bringing us to the concerns around methane and the activity that's going on in this case in Alberta, in Mexico, in Colorado, and providing some of the showing us some of the provision of solution providers for the collection of information. So I'll hand it over to Mark to walk us through the day. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, James. Thanks for that introduction, and welcome everybody. It's good to see such a great turnout. Relatively early for us in Western North America, but I know we've got guests from around the world. So welcome everybody. It was a great opportunity. I'm glad that James and the team at GMI reached out a month or so ago and asked if I'd be interested in moderating one of their webinars. As James said, I've got a lot of experience in the methane space, led the team in Alberta that created our methane regulations dating back to the latter part of 2015 when we started working on that. So I've had a lot of interactions with our panelists and with the governments that at least two of them represent. I also want to thank Eunice and Sam and Jamie. They're in the background here with Tetra Tech for all of their support and providing the platform for today's webinar. So a couple of housekeeping items. There's a chat function, obviously, and by now everybody knows how to use Teams. We've had a good year of practice. Please, if you have questions along the way as we got the panelists speaking, feel free to type your questions into that chat feature. I will be tracking all of those, trying to compile them into some themes so that when we get to the Q&A period, we can hit the ground running and get some of the questions answered. Again, we've got a great panel today, 5 people coming with some very unique perspectives. And so I think we're going to end up with a lot of good information being shared here. As you can tell, it's an exciting topic for me. Methane by itself is a great topic, but data and what we do with it and how we actually turn it into value is something that I'm really passionate about. So it's not just data, it's the quality of the data, it's sharing the data. It's really, to me, a key of how we're going to move methane reduction beyond just getting compliance and actually generating value. And again, we've seen lots of opportunities popping up, lots of people capturing those opportunities, and it's really just trying to grow on that theme. So we're going to hear 5 very unique perspectives from these panelists. But I think if you listen close, you're also going to find at least one common thread, and I would guess a whole pile of common threads that weave their way through these 5 presentations. And trust me, it's not because the 5 of them compared notes and tried to write a script. I think it's the theme of today's just makes it easy to find those threads. So first off today, and that's it for my comments because I want to turn this over to the stars of our show. So first off, I'd like to introduce Dora Luz-Janas. Dora comes to us from Mexico City this morning. She works as a member of the team at ASEA. Happy to say, in my previous role at the Alberta Energy Regulator, we've worked closely with ASEA, probably going back almost 7 years now. Not just on the topic of methane, but on a number of topics related to regulation. Dora currently leads the General Directorate of Comprehensive Operations Management within ASEA's methane team. And it's basically her team that's responsible for the development of Mexico's methane regulations for the hydrocarbon sector. So Dora has a BA degree in International Relations from Ibero-American University and a Master's in Environmental Science and Society from the University of Essex. She's served in several positions in the Mexican Congress and public administration, all of those focused on environment and energy. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Dora. Welcome, Dora.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. On behalf of Mr. Angel Carrizales Lopez, Executive Director of the Agency for Safety, Energy and Environment, I would like to thank Global Methane Initiative Oil and Gas Subcommittee for the kind invitation to participate in this webinar. Next, please. I will make a brief comment on the emission control and prevention cycle, and this shows how the regulation in Mexico is implemented. And talking about that, the important stage is the diagnosis stage, because it's there when the regulated makes the identification, classification, and quantification of methane emissions using a broad set of methodologies according to what is a Mexican reality. Then it constructs a program that sets a goal that is going to be achieved in 6 years' time and implements the regulation. This goal is achieved by implementing the best practices, and allow me to say that some of the best practices were taken as an example of what the GMI initiative has shown. It has proven to be or to give significant methane emission reductions. And in the final stage, we have the continuous improvement phase of the regulation, where the regulated has to conduct an internal audit and also submit the both the what we call the program for reduction and control of emissions and the annual implementation report to the verification of a third party that is going to be authorized by the agency. Next, please. Here you can see a timeline where it only shows that the regulations enter into force on November the 7th in 2018. The regulations were modified last year, so we can start receiving the first PPCMs in June this year, and the first compliance assessment reports in June next year. Please, next, please. So, talking about data, we are going to start receiving in June the first PPCMs that integrate the information per facility and to the degree of equipment and components within that facility. Then what we are going to do is analyze the data to see what targets were set, what methodologies were used, and what are the best practices that are going to be implemented. We also foresee to systematize that information, but we have not decided yet if it's going to be through the database or its platform or it is an interface. Then we also want to create a repository of information by facility to keep track whether they are or are not able to achieve the goal that they already have established. And also we want to have publish a progress report that allowed all interested in this fascinating topic to see how is the Mexican oil and gas sector doing with methane reductions. Next, please. So let me take you back to 2017, where we saw the importance of having accurate data on the oil and gas sector in Mexico. We didn't have a mandatory MRV for all the facilities, nor for methane. We only have the information that was provided by the National Inventory of Greenhouse Gases and Compounds, and also the information that was taken from the annual operating card. But the data was used for different purposes, whether it was for commercial or environmental purpose. And with this, I'm not saying one or the other is best, but only to set the picture we have in that time. And with that information, what we expected. So at writing the regulation piece, we wanted to contribute to the international effort to mitigate methane emissions. So we established the obligation to report data from each facility within the hydrocarbon sector, from equipments and components that have already been proved to have the main reductions in time, and encourage tier 3 as much as possible, because as you may know, the IPCC methodology allows for broad scope from tier 1 to tier 3. So we wanted to encourage that and to have an initial picture of how is was the oil and gas sector in Mexico, establishing a base year, and starting from that to the 6-year period in which they have to comply with the auto-declared goal. So we have this regulatory piece that allows us to have that. And the next, please. So to the collection, verification, and sharing of information, the collection of information will be provided by the diagnosis stage that is going to be put in the PPCM, which is the program, and also information from the leak detection and repair program, which is mandatory for all the facilities in Mexico, and through a set of formats. This decision was important because we didn't want to receive information in one or another way. So we wanted to concentrate it at least in a already set for different formats for the facilities. And who is going to do the verification of that data? Well, first of all, is a third party, and they will have to verify by the moment they audit the PPCM, and also in the moment while they audit the annual compliance report. So we also have the challenge to write the guidelines for the third party on what exactly to verify about the data that was going to be provided. And also the verification can be done by ASEA in the when we receive the programs, and also when we conduct audit visits. And we expect to share this information with other agencies in the federal Mexican government, as well as to the interested public through the progress report. Next, please. This presents challenges, of course, because since we don't have already received the first programs, we see the challenges for the diagnosis part if the regulator is using the adequate methodology, if they are conducting or classifying the information quite right, and also in the PPCM confirmation and the implementation report presentations, where the measurements have to be done with accurate methodologies. So the challenge is to whether to see if they measure correctly, if they keep track of the emissions in every facility, in every equipment and component, and if they have the real participation of the multidisciplinary team that is established in the regulations, and so many opportunities with the improvements of formats, to receive feedback from third parties, and to also receive feedback from the regulations. Next, please. And what to use, a single platform or an interface? This, as I said, is not already decided, but we see some challenges like the storage capacity, the cost of that platform or interface versus the budgetary restrictions, and the feasibility to develop a platform or an interface as ASEA needs it, or if ASEA can take some of the already existing in the market platforms, and who can develop this kind of platforms for us. If are they based in Mexico, or are they based in another country that have the possibilities to allow the integration of data in a remote way? And also the opportunities, of course, because we can also strengthen our capabilities or our abilities and skills, not only as a regulator agency, but also we foresee the strengthening of skills in the regulated, in the capturing of data and adding the data to that platform, and also from the third parties, which they can also or could also integrate the data of the opinions that they provide to the regulated through these platforms. Next, please. And to conclude, just a few things about the trusting on data, since it's going to be critical for ASEA, since data is going to be provided by the regulated or industry, and the data is also going to be verified by the third party. So we have to have confidence on what is provided and what is to be what is verified by the third party. before we receive the information. And also, of course, we believe that adding value to the data would be a very important part when we verify that information. And to verify that information, we have to establish, of course, a process to verify it, and the process to be certain that the principles already established in the regulations were followed, and the verification of the quality of the data that is provided. And for my part, it's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dora. You rose to the challenge. Squeezing a lot of great information into a 10-minute period is not easy, and so kudos. Again, I will not distract. My head is full of all sorts of questions, and it's bringing back fond memories of challenges we had in Alberta as a regulator, and what to do and how to get that baseline data. So thank you for setting the tone for this. Next, I'd like to introduce Robin Willey. The AER, when I was there, Colorado was actually one of the first jurisdictions we looked to in 2015 when we were tasked with coming up with methane regulations for our province. So Colorado has been in this game, I will say, for an extended period of time compared to a lot of other jurisdictions. And so it's really a pleasure to have Robin on this panel. Robin's the Chief Strategy Officer for the Air Pollution Control Division in the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Again, one of the things that surprised me when we first met with Colorado a number of years ago was it was the public health department that we were dealing with, and not an energy regulator. So again, a different perspective and a valuable perspective. Prior to this role, Robin served as the Senior Assistant Attorney General at the Colorado Department of Law, representing the Air Division. Robin and her team have been extremely busy over the last few years with the adoption of new oil and gas emissions inventory program in 2019, and they're continuing to work on developing a methane reduction program for the oil and gas sector. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Robin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
We can, perfect.
Okay, terrific. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are, but it's certainly morning here in Colorado. Very happy to be here today to talk to you probably very quickly about some of the work that Colorado has been doing. So next slide, please. So in Colorado, there has been some recent movement to intensify the pace at which we address greenhouse gas emissions and methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. So we had a suite of bills adopted by our state legislature in 2019 that I just want to highlight here because they're so critical to the work that we do here in Colorado. So these first two bills, House Bill 19-1261 and Senate Bill 19-096, establish statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals, directing the state and directing the agencies to work together. So not just my agency, the Air Division, but also the Colorado Energy Office, Colorado Department of Transportation, Public Utilities Commission, et cetera, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions statewide 26% by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050. As part of that effort, the agencies here in Colorado have developed what we call the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Reduction Roadmap. And that took over a year to put together with data collection, modeling, et cetera, to identify from what sectors do we need to seek what types of reductions to achieve these targets. And the roadmap identified our three largest sectors contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Probably won't surprise anybody who works in this space, but it's transportation, electricity generation, and the oil and gas sector. And our oil and gas sector, while it's not our largest source category of greenhouse gas emissions, it is our largest source category of methane emissions. A related but different bill, Senate Bill 19-181, targets specifically the oil and gas industry for reduction of methane, volatile organic compounds, and oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, and requires both my agency, the Air Division, and a sister agency, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, which regulates more about the siting and production of oil and gas, as opposed to my agency, which focuses on air pollution emissions, to take significant actions to protect public health and welfare and the environment from the impacts of oil and gas production here in our state, and requires a number of things, including more leak detection and repair programs and continuous methane emissions monitoring. Next slide, please. Both before and after the adoption of these critical bills, Colorado, as Mark indicated, has a long history of regulation of this sector. We here in Colorado have an ozone non-attainment area, which for those familiar with the United States program identifies specific areas where the air quality does not meet the federal standards for ozone. And so as oil and gas is our largest source of VOC emissions, which is a precursor to ozone, we've been working with the industry and our stakeholders to address emissions from this industry from a VOC perspective for a very long time. However, in 2014, we were the first US state to specifically address methane from the oil and gas industry in our LDAR program, leak detection and repair, and our regulation of emissions from pneumatic controllers. And we have made constant improvements to those programs. And in 2019, we adopted a very detailed inventory for the oil and gas sector for a number of pollutants, including VOC, NOx, methane, ethane, N2O, carbon monoxide, et cetera. Those inventories are going to start coming into us in June of this year for 2020 year data. And they'll be submitted every June for the foreseeable future for the previous calendar year data. In 2020, we adopted our first pre-production control program that requires the control of emissions during the flowback process. And specific to this seminar, we adopted a new monitoring program where our oil and gas operators have to conduct air quality monitoring once they start drilling through the first 6 months of production. And they have to submit monitoring plans, and they can choose amongst methane, VOC, or certain HAPs, hazardous air pollutants, which to monitor. We don't require the monitoring of one specific pollutant. My agency right now is, as Mark indicated, is working on developing a comprehensive greenhouse gas reduction program for the oil and gas sector. And we intend to propose that to our commission, which adopts rules and regulations at the end of this year. There's also the separate agency, our sister agency, the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and they last year adopted a comprehensive rework of their rules governing the siting and permitting of oil and gas development. And as part of that, they require what we've called a cumulative impacts analysis, which requires the operator to submit data, including air quality data, so that we can analyze the cumulative impact of the permitting of each additional facility. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to talk about a couple of our monitoring programs and the type of data we're collecting. Next slide, please. So we are very excited to have the Colorado Air Monitoring Mobile Lab that we can deploy to different locations around our state to collect different air quality data during all phases of oil and gas development. This data, it's sophisticated, it's state of the art, and it collects a lot of real-time monitoring data. Next slide, please. I don't know, a few years ago here in Colorado, we had a tragedy happen where we had an explosion from an abandoned flow line. Out of that tragedy came the Mark Martinez and Joey Irwin Memorial Public Projects Fund. And the operator involved in that tragedy was fined a significant amount of money that's going to the funding of projects to evaluate data, collect, and analyze air quality impacts associated with oil and gas. And this is just a list of some of the projects that are happening under that. I'm going to talk about a couple in detail. Next slide, please. The project funded a mobile air monitoring van. It's not as sophisticated as the Camel that I just talked about, but it's a different type of monitoring that can also be driven around to measure different pollutants and to help identify leaks and unintended emissions. And we have developed a program to notify promptly the operator and ensure that those unintended emissions are addressed. Next slide, please. We also have an aerial survey project. This is very exciting. That's about to get underway this year. We're doing two different types of aerial surveys. One is we're working to find point source plumes, what we call here in the US sometimes super emitters, and notify the operators so that we can get those super emissions addressed and to understand the stochastic nature of those emissions here in our state. We've seen some work that's been done in Texas and California and elsewhere in the world, and we're really excited to sort of compare how those results line up with our state, where we have done a lot to reduce emissions, and we have a lot of the best practices embedded in our regulations. We also are working with a different company called Scientific Aviation to do mass balance estimates in our main oil producing basin, the Denver-Julesburg Basin, to try to really understand exactly how much emissions from a top-down perspective do we have here in Colorado. And we do have an additional challenge because we most of our oil and gas is produced here in the Front Range, where we also have a lot of other industries. Next slide, please. We're also working with the University of Chicago's Energy and Environment Lab to investigate and study different types of remote sensing technology to evaluate potential additional monitoring for the oil and gas sector. I apologize, I'm not getting to every detail on this slide, but I believe those slides will be available for those who are interested. Next slide, please. Oh, and I'm done. So those are the questions. Just to tie into a point that Dora mentioned, we are working on building our database to collect and store and analyze our inventories, and we're working to see how we can effectively, once we collect this enormous volume of data from our inventories, from our mobile monitoring, from our aerial monitoring, we have a robust leak detection program. We have our own inspectors that do IR camera inspections of these facilities. How we can collect all of that data to really form a good picture of where we are with emissions from this industry and how we track our progress. So thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much, Robin. Always good to, like I said, was first jurisdiction we reached out to is the AER, and it's always good to learn what Colorado is up to, because you guys tend to be near the forefront of the world when it comes to methane and other emissions from the oil and gas sector. What we're going to do now is start a sort of a trio of Calgarians, just by coincidence, maybe because that's where I'm located, but the next three panelists all hail from Calgary. Next up on our panel is Alberto Alba. Alberto is the principal at Process Ecology. So Alberto brings 25 or more, we won't get into details, so we'll call it 25 years of chemical engineering research, process optimization for sustainability experience. So back from well before anybody was worried about methane emissions because of greenhouse gas factors, Alberto was working in this space, optimizing processes for the oil industry and beyond. His career spans many industrial sectors, also includes some time in academia and in the federal government. Alberto has a biochemical engineering degree from Metropolitan University in Mexico City, and he also holds an MBA, an MSc, and a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Manchester. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Alberto, and we're going to talk about going beyond compliance. Alberto?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and welcome everybody. Great, it's a pleasure for me to be here. So yeah, we're switching a little bit now. We heard from the regulators. Now I'm going to be talking from the service provider side of things of our industry. And what I'd like to talk about today is what we've learned about leveraging data and engineering models to go beyond that regulatory compliance and into emissions mitigation through what I'm calling here integrated models. But first, allow me a few comments about our company. And please, next slide. And this is because I think our history will be relevant to describe our point of view. Process Ecology, founded here in Alberta, Calgary in 2003. The background of our team is in process engineering and simulation software development. And again, we started our practice working with oil and gas clients, applying computer simulation models for process design, for plant optimization, debottlenecking, and not necessarily emissions mitigation initially. But then around 2007, our clients started asking for help in using process models and simulation to quantify our emissions for regulatory reporting. Next, please. Now, today, we're supporting around 50 operating companies here in Western Canada with their reporting obligations, whether it's for greenhouse gases, for benzene, criteria, contaminants, but more recently, methane. So since that introduction of the Alberta and the federal Canadian methane regulation in late 2019, we've been working with the oil and gas sector to respond to this very detailed and very demanding regulatory requirement for the oil and gas sector, which leads me into my next slide, please. So here, again, I don't think I want to talk too much about all these different aspects of reality, as most of us in this call are likely fully aware of the pressures that our industry is facing from financial markets, from regulatory, and so on. But let me concentrate on the last point, which is the main topic of this panel, which is the data, information. And this word that I think it's one of those common threads that Mark referred to, it's how do we trust this information? Next slide, please. So in our experience working with these operating companies, what we found, it's clear that, again, different organizational forms, different information systems that are in place, they can create barriers to effective flow of data and information. So we've seen many times cases where different company functions require actually exactly the same data, and yet there's little or no flow between these functions. As an example, the production accounting function, it's traditionally been the most accurate in record keeping, of course, for obvious reasons. So it tracks the main flow of products and revenues of these companies. But then as methane and greenhouse gas emission reporting requirements have become more and more stringent, it's very clear that these functions are intimately, very closely related. Yeah. So as we work with producers to improve their emissions reporting, then there are direct benefits in improving production accounting reports, for instance, fuel, flare, vent volumes that have to be reported. Finally, I have to mention the engineering departments, and more specifically, those working on emissions mitigation projects, which again, for the most part, would require the same data. And yet, when we've been engaged in these projects, we usually find ourselves starting from scratch, building engineering models, using older design information, for instance. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing to address these challenges is the use of what we're calling here integrated models. These models imply, or systems, these systems imply that high quality data is generated and centralized for use in all these functions. So as you can see in this diagram, hopefully it's not too small, there's a ton of inputs required for these systems, not just, we're talking about facilities inventories, equipment inventories, component inventories, activity levels, but also many other details like operating conditions, pressures, temperatures, fluid compositions, operating hours, direct measurements, among other inputs. Now, at the core of these systems, there are going to be detailed engineering simulation models of all these facilities and emission sources in such a way that the generated emissions from these systems can be trusted. Again, here, our point of view, like I mentioned, is that by using engineering simulation models of all these facilities and applying the principles of mass and energy balances, we can validate and trust the information that we're producing from these systems. And then these data, as you can see there, can be used in a consistent manner for regulatory reporting, whatever those obligations happen to be, for business, corporate reporting, ESG, production accounting, but also for engineering, the reduction portion there, which is emissions mitigation and optimization. Next slide, please. Of course, yes, probably not a brand new idea or anything. And we always hear this question, what about the data? So it can certainly be a daunting task to collect all the required data for these systems, just to set them up and then to maintain these systems. Now, in our experience, it's very unlikely that operators can wait to have a perfect data set. And I think it's very clear in everybody's mind that this is going to be an ongoing, continuous improvement exercise. And we've been working closely with our clients to identify better solutions for data flows, developing interfaces, better systems integration, and so on. But in addition, with a good understanding of the engineering practices in the sector, we find that it's possible to develop solid assumptions to generate estimates of this missing data, which can lead to very good starting points. So what we've been doing is implementing engineering design rules that allow us to fill in those data gaps based on general information, such as facility types, what fluids are being processed, is it sweet gas, is it sour gas, as well as applying probability distributions that consider local conditions to arrive at base cases that can provide value very quickly. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, the objective is not, let's say, just regulatory compliance as an isolated goal. But what we're all after is that ability to identify optimal emission mitigation strategies that can take into account the unique characteristics of each company or jurisdiction. So which mitigation technologies would make sense for a given operator will depend on many factors, many local factors, such as economic or financial parameters, infrastructure, government policies, and so on, which are very unique for each jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So as I'm showing here in these screenshots of an integrated model, the emissions profiles then can be evaluated at multiple scales. It could be at equipment level, could be at facility level, company level, or even jurisdiction level. And then with trust and confidence in this data, we can then generate those regulatory and corporate reports on a consistent basis. Next slide, please. Now, with this detailed, high-quality information, then the identification and mitigation strategies follows. Now we have all the data we need for volumes, compositions, pressures, location, infrastructure. So we can very quickly, let's say, implement engineering and financial modules on top of this data to very quickly generate these mitigation strategy profiles and identify those optimal strategies that take into account all the local parameters that will come into these evaluations. So these integrated models can enable users to very quickly explore scenarios, compare mitigation strategies in a very efficient manner. And at the same time, we're leveraging the major efforts that are going into data gathering for regulatory reporting that are already in place for production accounting, and then bringing and extracting value from all these significant efforts that are going on all over the world at this time. So I think I'm going to leave it there. And again, I look forward to our conversation at the Q&A session. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Alberto. I'm impressed. We got a great panel here. You guys are doing a fantastic job of sticking to your times, making my job easy as the moderator. So thank you, everybody. Next up, I'd like to introduce Brenna Barlow. Brenna is the project manager for sustainability at Radical. We'll let Brenna give you a little flavor of Radical, I think, on her opening slide. Brenna is widely recognized for developing out-of-the-box strategies, both all the way from field measurement technology to deployment in the methane emission space. Some really, really cool stuff, I'll call it, for lack of a good technical term, over the course of her career. Her career spans a number of different industries, everything from oil and gas to clean power to forestry. So again, an interesting perspective, because it's not just fixated on oil and gas and methane from oil and gas. So with that, I'll keep us on time here, and I'll turn it over to Brenna. Welcome, Brenna.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody at ECCC and EPA and everybody else who helped organize us today. For everyone's background, Radical is primarily an organization focused on carbon monetization. I work for Radical in a few capacities, but what's really interesting about how my work has evolved is that these days I work on strategizing and assessing the best overall emissions benefits or strategies for an organization. In Alberta, we're generating data and collecting data that's creating value for clients. Last year, it was $40 million. Last week, we finished a project that was over $5 million in terms of a carbon trade. I note this to be clear that when we're talking about generating value from emissions data, it's very real, it's very possible, and it's happening right now. So where others are primarily concerned with the cost of emissions data, we think that focusing on extracting value from data is a better option. You could drive down costs, and I think you could drive down, for example, the cost per survey for a site, or you could drive down the cost per ton of reductions, but the cost per ton of reductions that you have to pay is really not nearly as important as the price per ton that you get. What we really want out of emissions data is value. We often see that you can drive down the cost a little bit, but you can drive up the value by a lot more. Alberta is a jurisdiction where regulation and reporting requirements in the oil and gas industry have been stringent for several years now. So often emissions data is viewed as a sunk cost because to date, the main objective of any data campaign was to meet regulatory requirements. You can advance 2 slides, Sam. So it's kind of like collecting data to meet regulatory requirements is not a fun thing to have to spend money on. You have to do it, and potentially the only upside is that you avoid non-compliance fines. It's this attitude that gets everybody stuck in the concepts of cost and efficiency when it comes to emissions data. The real value comes from moving beyond compliance. There's only increasing opportunities for monetization beyond compliance these days. We've got carbon markets, compliance and voluntary. There's fuel standards markets. There's the value you derive from the ability to show investors your emissions performance. There's the value a jurisdiction's regulatory body in demonstrating emissions performance to promote investment in infrastructure. There's using data to show how you are meeting ESG goals. And there's using data to show how you're achieving net zero emissions or whatever other emissions reductions goals you've chosen for your organization. All of these opportunities rely on high quality data. The carbon and fuel markets are ruthless in their scrutinization of data used to calculate emissions reductions. And if you have ESG and net zero goals, that data is going to be public very soon. We foresee a future where mergers and acquisitions in oil and gas are probably not going to happen without the disclosure of emissions intensity of production. And in all honesty, find me a CEO who wouldn't be delighted to hear that their assets are worth more because the organization can transparently prove their emissions performance. All of this really means that you need high quality data that can stand up to scrutiny and drive up that value. So there's a few things that we've employed to overcome some of the main issues with emissions data management and really drive up that quality. There's a lot of other things that are very important, but I'm going to focus on some perspective changes and some attitude shifts that have the ability to result in more robust and higher quality emissions data. The first one I want to focus on is thinking about the field. You've got two things in oil and gas that sometimes don't align. That's the boardroom and the field. I've been on both sides of these things, trying to communicate between one and the other. And they're both important. But when you're figuring out how to design and execute on emissions data systems, think less about the boardroom and think more about the field activities. We all know that data management systems need to be designed to report out effectively. That's a given. But we don't often put the same emphasis on the inputs. How is data getting into that system? This is a shift in attitude. recognizing that while regulators and policymakers may be a user of emissions data, they're actually not the primary user. The primary user of any given emissions data is the individual out in the field collecting that data and inputting it. This may seem counterintuitive, particularly given that I think my audience right now is pretty heavily invested in reporting and policy. But if you consider it this way, think about everybody who interacts with your entire data supply chain, everybody who touches that data from collection to reporting. Who has the most control over the quality of the data? It's actually the person inputting the data into the system. That person collecting the data in the field. It's the tech in the field that you hire to do a survey. It's the operator doing daily or weekly or monthly inspections. It's the production accountant who does uploads. It's the person collecting metered readings. It's their skill and their judgment and what they need that makes for a high quality and high value emissions data set. All of the other users are legitimately important, but this one has the potential to have the most impact on quality and accuracy. Our data systems are heavily invested in the design of software application interfaces that guide users, inputters, through the data inputting process in a very simplified way. We use a few methods for this, but essentially the goal is to make it easy for the primary user to be highly accurate. The second attitude shift I want to touch on is early intervention with your data. In the typical life cycle of a project, like any project, just pick something, you plan some things, then you go do some things, you report and analyze on said things, you get it senior reviewed, and then it gets delivered to the body that needs it. The fundamental issue with this is that the brain that needs to approve that data, that senior reviewer, doesn't get access to that data until a very late stage in the game. At this point, you're 80% of the way through your budget, or you're 80% of the way through your project or your reporting period. At that point, the cost of data collection error or inaccuracies in your data mean going back and doing it all over again. So the lesson here, intervene early. One of the things that we do differently is build controls right into our data collection processes. In our systems, we actually have 2 QA/QC checks very early on. The first one occurs before the data is even submitted to the system. You can't actually hit submit on a survey to our system until you've done a QA/QC check. The second occurs as soon as the data hits our system. So both of these occur before there's any reporting, any processing, or any analysis. So my advice to everybody would be to interact and intervene with your emissions data immediately. Do this before it costs you more money, before it triggers the need for duplicative site inspections, before you've been in non-compliance for 3 months, before, preferably, that large anomalous leak has been emitting for 3 weeks, before you've wasted valuable time windows in your reporting period, and most importantly, do it before that piece of data gets averaged, aggregated, and reported into information that's meant to progress a decision or a policy. That's where you can drive value from your emissions data sets. The third attitude shift that I want to touch on is the concept of timeline. Sooner is better. When it comes to capitalizing on the value from emissions data, start now, get after it. These opportunities for maximizing the value of emissions data are out there and they're available right now. We kind of see this in the carbon crediting world and we call it credit regret. As soon as we present clients with the annual revenue value that they can see, their knee-jerk reaction, the human reaction to it, is to back calculate 3 years and think to themselves, well, if I did this 3 years ago, how much value would I get out of this? But I'm not just talking about carbon markets. There's a whole bunch of benefits to acting early when it comes to working with your emissions data. There's multiple other monetization pathways. There's so many ways to start benefiting not just an organization, but the entire sector or an entire jurisdiction. We want to drive up the value of our production using verifiable data. Those opportunities are available to us right now. The benefit of getting started and being an early mover is huge. Whether you're a producer, you could be a regulator, or even the entire producing jurisdiction, the ability to set precedents and remain on the bleeding edge of emissions reduction, monetization, and technology is borderline invaluable at this point. Mark, am I running out of time yet?
Yes, you are.
So can I have 30 seconds?
Sure, 30 seconds.
So no surprise there's probably a few people on the call who know me, but my closing comments on emissions data are that detail matters. Detail is important. All of these little things that we all encounter on a daily basis, all of the nuance, the granularity, they're so important. Like, we go through things like dates and emissions factors, activity rates, measurements, calibrations, weather, wind speed, experience, uncertainty, error. All of those things are very, very important to your emissions data sets as regulators, as policymakers, as decision makers at any level or any industry level. Like, take hold of that, be in charge of that, enjoy it, and empower it in everybody who works for you in collecting emissions data.
All right. Thank you very much, Brenna. That's a good way to wrap this up and leave us for our final speaker. So we left I was going to say the best to last, but that would be picking favorites out of the panel. So, but just to make Darcy feel good, because he's sat patiently waiting for his chance to get up here. So our final panelist is Darcy Spady. Darcy's a managing partner of Carbon Connect International, in addition to holding various positions on other boards of directors. Just as an aside, Darcy is also a grain farmer just north of Calgary here, so we're good to catch him early because we're not quite anywhere close to the growing season here in Alberta yet, especially after the weather we had a couple of days ago. In 2018, Darcy served as the president of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, and if I remember correctly, Darcy is the first Canadian to ever have the honor of holding that position. So it's great to have Darcy on the panel. He brings a BSc of Petroleum Engineering from U of A, but that is really not why we're here for Darcy today. It's about methane, it's about data. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Darcy. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks to all the organizers at GMI. I know, Sam, you're working hard in the background, and Eunice, you guys have helped put this together. And Mark, your time in goat herding us early in our morning has been good. So thanks for leaving me till last. My head is so full of questions that I'd like to just stop and take your job, Mark, but I won't. I will soldier through with maybe a little bit different viewpoint. As a longtime E&P operating side, upstream side guy, I see this from a little bit different point of view, and I got into this through the Society of Petroleum Engineers, which is a very large global organization, realizing that most of us in the drilling and completion side of the world aren't thinking a lot about this topic, and so I'm quite happy to be the generalist to take it back up to a high level. So I think that's canola on my first slide. I can't even see it correctly, but how appropriate. Our goals really are all about those colorful blocks that the UN put out a few years ago. They're general and they're fuzzy, but I think the more the world talks about this and we get this in our everyday thinking, the more success I think we're going to have. And I don't know what drives you here today, whether it's the Paris Accord targets, whether it's energy efficiency needs, whether it's the TCFD reporting requirements for your company in order to be listed, whether it's just good, proper, responsible energy development. I also sit on a reclamation remediation panel or industry advisory board at Olds College, and seeing it from the agricultural perspective always gives me a new perspective of my brethren and sister in the drilling and completion side. or whether you're just really focused on mitigation of GHGs, whatever the goals are, they're always visible to us. So the next slide outlines a little bit about some common things across the industry. I mean, I think you can fight for a couple of days over the term emissions, because I've had lots of those fights. But I don't care so much about terminology. I think we need to think where we're at. And I'm very happy that in various jurisdictions around the world, we've looked a lot at processing facilities and pipelines and permanent stuff. But I really challenge the upstream side. Robin talked about her camel, which I love. But I'd like to see that camel at drilling completions and workover sites that are temporary. Just because you're not permanently inscribed in the books doesn't mean there's issues going on. So from my point of view, I really want to see that temporary. The drilling rig moves in and does something. Well, does everybody on that rig know that the words vent to atmosphere are very bad words now? I mean, that used to be how you blew down pressure for safety, but it's a different world. And that's a bad thing to do. So I think we've got a long way to go, and we've done a really good job on the permanent side, but there's a massive market on the temporary side. So Carbon Connect International has been working primarily, we started on the training side, largely through the SPE, Society of Petroleum Engineers, and they always need global training, but we moved quite quickly into the baseline measurement or baseline collection, quantification, and implementation through programs in Alberta. Let's go to the next slide. I think this shows that we're involved in the collection part of the equation. And in collection, it's really important, we feel, to have an extremely simple data library. And for example, maybe it's just putting everybody in the same lowest common denominator, if you will, as low as file formatting to receive the data, so that all types of people can come into the system, whether you're sophisticated and you have a really good software behind you, or whether you're very simplistic and a remote operator somewhere in a tough part of the jurisdiction. It's really important to be able to receive all that data in the same manner, and the baseline and reduction assessment, opportunity assessment here in Alberta, or what we call BROA, is a good example of that. We're managing that for the province of Alberta, and it's very broadly used. And I'm happy to say that across the board, people are using it, getting involved, and getting data for the end result of quantification. The next slide shows the fact that the quantification can't happen really until the user interface is there and it accepts inputs from multiple systems. Dora referred to some of the sets of formats in the collection, and I couldn't agree more. So it's difficult to get simple enough to get a user interface that accepts inputs from multiple systems, complex and simple, and finding in a positive way the lowest common denominator, and being very user friendly. That gets the data collected. But Brenna makes a really good point. The accuracy at that field level is so critically important. So there's that constant balance. But it gets us into the quantification phase, and the next slide just uses some terminology. What's the learning from it, right? I mean, who needs these decisions? And if you look at it, it's all of us, right? It's the industry. And one of the things that I find that in the Middle East, they talk an awful lot about energy efficiency and holistic responses to all energy efficiency in all industries. I find that a little different flavor than I see in North America, where we're more specific and we drill down into things. But if you look at it from the operator point of view, I recall when I was running a small operator, we had shrinkage, and whether that shrinkage was joint venture accounting or your partner who was actually hosing you a little bit, or leaky pipes, which we now can quantify, whatever it was efficiency. And if we can leave 1% more of sales gas in a line, whether that's weathered sales gas from oil or sales gas from gas, if we can leave 1% more in the line, that's 1% more in our profitability. So this helps in the efficiency field with efficiency, for industry. It, of course, helps with regulators knowing what's going on. It helps with government making policy. And pretty soon, it's not just helping with investors, it's the gatekeeper. It's been mentioned a number of times that if you want financing, you're going to have to show your accounting. And in SPE, we did a lot of work on a thing called PRMS, Petroleum Reservoir Management System for Reserves Management. But now there's a trend coming for CRMS, Carbon Reserves Management System, and it's going to be equally as important as your reservoir management. So some of the solutions that come out of the learnings, the next slide shows just 4 of the ones that we're finding in the MTIP program we're administering for the province of Alberta, which is the Methane Technology Implementation Program. And these 4 that I've listed are pneumatic devices, the storage tank issues, compression, casing gas. These are all major areas where we can provide solutions of technology implementation into fixing the problem. I mean, it's all about data equal decisions, and it's all about good data from the baseline, making informed decisions. So the last slide is going to highlight that. If we can go to it, basically we have data from facilities, sources, vents, leak rates, emissions. Again, we can argue about all the terms. You know, the operator goes out to a well in the morning and she sees that the pressure's built up so the oil doesn't flow, so she bleeds it off. Not good, but the oil's flowing. So that's old thinking. But from all that data about those sources leads to better decisions. And that's, you know, hopefully the result of these measurements is project recommendations for or past compliance, those abatement cost curves, which are so critical. And ultimately, if there's a jurisdiction with programs, it's a review of available funding opportunities. And we've seen some tremendous success in Alberta in the Methane Technology Implementation Program about that. And at that point, I'll turn it back to Mark, who's got his time hand up. Thanks, Mark.
Good job paying attention to the cues, Darcy. Thank you very much for that. That was a perfect close. Wrapped a number of themes together. I challenged everybody who was on this call, and I think when I was paying attention, we peaked out about 96 people. I know people come and go on these things as your day progresses. I've got one question that was in the chat room that I'm going to get to, but I challenged everybody to see if you could spot some common threads that wove through here. And one that I spotted, and maybe it wasn't a common thread for all 5 panelists, because I actually don't think our 2 regulators touched on it. But it's what I wrote down as beyond compliance, right? So you definitely heard that from our last 3 panelists, and from a number of different perspectives, whether that's beyond compliance because that's the way you operate. It's beyond compliance because that's what you need to get investment. It's beyond compliance because you can generate value with that. But as a former regulator, that's music to my ears, right? If we are only doing all of this great stuff in the methane space because we want to be compliant and we don't want to have somebody like Robin or somebody like Dora on our case because we are not compliant, we are missing great opportunities. Another theme that I heard from all 5 for sure, and I don't think it's just because I'm listening with my ears, but it was trust, right? That how do you trust the data? What's the quality of the data? A lot of different ways of saying it, but it's, you know, whether it's your stakeholders, if you're a government or a regulator, your stakeholders need to believe there's trust in the data. You need to have trust in the data. Company decision makers need to have trust in that data. How do you gain that? And then the final theme is if you could do all of that and have that data accessible, right? It doesn't need to be in one database. I didn't hear anybody saying, well, you all have to come on board and we have the master database and we'll keep everybody's data. What I heard is how do you make sure that all the databases that we have will share? And so that kind of ties to the larger question, and Bruce Chisholm asked this on the chat, and it's not really the focus of the panel, and he specifically aimed it at GMI. But we're going to turn it over to somebody on the panel, and I'm just trying to decide who's the lucky recipient of this. So there, Bruce's comment or question was that the accuracy of methane emissions data, especially at a national level, is almost always called into question. And I know, as good a job as ECCC and Stats Canada do on the Canadian side, even internally, we had lots of discussions between the provinces and James's team about who had the better data and what was that true inventory. If we want to bring an ENGO in, they're going to tell us that we're missing lots of emissions. So what are the plans for improving national inventory? So that is the verbatim of what Bruce was asking about. But for the panel, it's more along the lines of how are the things that we have talked about, multi-level detection, good data, trust in the data. How can those help a country at a national level really have that transparency and trust in their inventory, which will help them drive policy and regulatory decisions? And I'm not going to hand it over to either of the two regulators and put them on the spot and feel like we're picking on their jurisdiction. So instead, I'm going to hand it over to Alberto, and maybe Alberto just offer a few thoughts on kind of how we can do a better job at a national inventory level, while also now moving down into the detail space that we're in.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and again, I don't think that there's very simple answers to that, but I think another common thread that I saw there, Mark, was continuous improvement.
Yeah.
And again, I think, the inventories that we're, able to generate for individual operators and that then get translated into national inventories are getting better all the time. We've been following new developments on remote sensing. It was touched on here before, satellite measurements. And these distinctions between up-down inventories versus bottom-up models, which is what we use. I think there's a lot of new information being generated by different agencies that are going to help us close this gap. And I think that's going to help improve, again, that trust in the data. Because when you see these differences currently, then it opens questions as to where this difference is coming from. So I think it's a continuous improvement. I think there's a lot of work going on to improve these models, to improve the inventories, and it's just going to take a little bit more time to get there. That's how I see it.
Excellent. No, thank you for that, Alberto. And that's good, because that keyed me on. I was thinking, geez, how did I miss the continuous improvement thread? Because it's one of the first things I jotted down on my notes while you guys were speaking, and it's because Dora actually showed us a flow, or I'll call a life cycle, that they're basing their work on at ASEA. And one of the elements, after you've got your best practices using today's technology, but then you're going to move into that space of continuous improvement. So Dora, maybe if you don't mind, why don't I phrase this more as a question, just to make it a little simpler for you. So what is ASEA looking at is how you're going to be able to use and keep up with this ever-changing world of technology, where we have different, better, shinier ways of detecting methane, quantifying methane, and maybe give us just a little bit more flavor into how you see the continuous improvement part of your life cycle fit into how you're going to work as a national regulator.
Yes, it is very important for us because all the philosophy of ASEA is based on the continuous improvement. So we of course, the regulation is written in a way that it allows the integration of new technology, and it is also since the beginning. I mean, by choosing the methodology, one thing that you can, as an industry, not do is change methodologies in the 6-year period of compliance with your auto-declare methane goal, but that is for keeping track of that regulation, of that reductions. And as a part of the continuous improvement, of course, we are aware that the things that were available in the market at that time when we started writing the regulations are already in the field. So yes, it is part of our regulation, and we of course allow the use of this wide technology from some of you mentioned satellites, airplanes, and the bands that go to the field. And this is very important for us. And of course, the regulation allows this to be implemented.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dora. So I'm going to keep pulling on the thread here. You guys make my job real easy. So Dora was just mentioning, at least again, what I heard, they're in ASEA and Mexico are looking to make sure that the regulation allows innovation, allows technology. Yes, you have to set some constraints that you can't change the methodology for reporting every 2 months, because now you just get a dog's breakfast, another Mark technical term, of data that you can't reconcile with various vintages. But that ability of a regulator to look at the space and say, well, we need to be able to allow technology to progress. We need to allow companies to do something that's we may not even be aware of today, but it's going to be the best way to reduce methane 2 years from now. That clued me into something that I heard when Robin was presenting, and Robin was talking about, now I won't name the actual subsection of your legislation, but you've got rolled out a new requirement of basically continuous monitoring of air emissions from sort of the pre-spud of a well through to the first 6 months of production. And something I think I heard, and so Robin, this is a part of the question, is you said, well, we're not even going to tell the operators what they need to be measuring, whether it's methane, whether it's volatile organics, whether it's NOx, as long as they have continuous monitoring. And so again, if I've got this a little bit wrong, this is your chance to correct me, but it's also, was that done intentionally with that mindset of knowing that there's going to be new technologies, different ways of detecting methane and other air pollutants over time, and you're staying nimble and trying to ensure that you've got the best approach? Robin?
Mark, yes, thank you for the question. Yes, our program for pre-production and early production monitoring was intentionally developed to be flexible. I'm sorry, I think somebody is talking, yeah, maybe forgot to mute themselves. Ibrahim, yeah, thank you. It was intentionally developed to be flexible to recognize that monitoring technology is advancing and innovation is happening at a very rapid pace right now. And this was our first attempt at a formal regulatory monitoring program of this nature. And our commission was very intentional about wanting that our program will be iterative and it will grow as we learn more about these emissions and about monitoring technologies. But we wanted to be broad enough, so long as there are certain safeguards around the use of the technology, which are found through the submittal of the plan, which asks for details about the monitoring capabilities and the siting, etc. These safeguards, we wanted to be flexible about the type of technology that would be used, recognizing that this area is exploding right now, and every week it seems like we're learning about a new or different type of technology, and we wanted to encourage that innovation.
Excellent, thank you. Again, quick touch on between technology innovations and societal expectations changing. Again, one of my pet themes is that we're seeing progression. If you're a regulator, it becomes a huge challenge to try and change at the pace of the world around us. Between the technology changes and trying to anticipate what might be available, but also what the expectations, whether it's from your government or whether it's from society, of what you need to be regulating. So again, good to see examples like the one that Robin's got in Colorado of how a regulator can stay nimble and still be regulating and achieving the outcomes, but not getting in the way of that innovation. So we got a few more minutes. So I'm just going to continue the thread through Brenna and then to Darcy. And so Brenna, We just finished talking about, or I just finished talking about how, regulators face a challenge of staying nimble in this ever-changing world of technology and societal expectations or government expectations. I'll flip that around a little bit, and maybe just in a couple of minutes, if you've got some ideas on how does industry stay nimble in the face of ever-changing regulations, ever-changing ESG expectations, ever-changing market drivers, again, whether it's carbon markets, whether it's your investment market. What are some of the tools and how can the industry stay nimble so that they're not on their heels when it gets into this space, so that they're continuing to work in that space of beyond compliance?
So I do think it's a challenge. I think it's a really good question because I think it's a really good challenge. It's one of the things that we help our clients on. It's one of the things that we collaborate on. When I use the term the bleeding edge when it comes to methane innovation, I actually really mean that. I mean that the people who are setting precedences, who are setting the standards, really get to be at the beginning of all of that. There's definitely challenges associated with that. We see things like, even the highest performers in industry struggle to meet new regulations when they come into force. And it's not because they're underperforming, it's because they have to adapt to something new. And adapting to something new is going to be a mainstay in GHG emissions for several years to come. That's just the way that life works. So I think that there's a lot of ways for industry to meet those challenges. Again, I go back to some of the things I presented on. Get after it early. Understand your data. Understand what's going on. Like, engage, understand, learn. Get all of that under your belt, kind of thing would be my advice. Knowledge is power at the end of the day.
Excellent. Thank you, Brenna. And we've got
Mark, sorry, I just wanted to add one comment there. Sorry about interjecting.
No problem.
Because something
Please.
that we've seen is, of course, not just the oil and gas, but many companies are talking about digital transformation. And that means, bringing all those new software technologies with cultural change to make something happen. And I think this is the perfect example where that, can help us move forward faster. So let's bring that digital transformation and let's make it real around this methane emission reduction.
Right. And I think that's a good add, Alberto, because again, that's, wasn't built right into the title of what this webinar was about, but it is that how, if we have good data and digital transformation, again, whether there's lots of different ways we can get all of us get our hands on the same data set. And that helps everybody. It helps with nimble decision making by regulators and policymakers. It helps companies make sure that they are still in that space of being beyond compliance. It helps the innovators out there. And I see a lot of chat in the meeting room here between people who are going to be connecting after this, right? But it helps those innovators come up with, well, what is that next technology? Or I have a technology and I see where I can deploy it because I know what all that data is. So many ways that having that trusted source of quality data easily accessible, right? And our panelists touched on that. It's the data. It doesn't just have to be easily accessible for that audience that I just rattled off. It also has to be easy to access so that you can input into it. So you can take data out of a variety of different sources, or you can get people down, boots on the ground, people out in remote field locations who can easily access that data set to either add to it or to review it and use that data for something. So Bren, I'll quickly turn it over to you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Darcy with one last question. Oh, you're on mute, Brenna. You owe me 5.
I'm up to $25.
Yeah. All right.
I guess I would say just add to the laundry list of the things that Mark mentioned there, in terms of what we have available to us these days to make data sets work. we're very quickly moving forward with making data sets talk to each other and integrate data sets. So I'd really like to encourage some more thought about that and how collaboration between different data management systems can work in the future. And I'm hands down, Mark, thanks.
Okay, so Darcy, one last question over to you, and I'll hand it over to you both from your role or your career in the petroleum sector, your role as president of SPE, but also I'll hand it over to you this specific question because you're a farmer. Is the culture shift, and you touched on it in your presentation, but how do we help drive that culture shift all the way out to the front line? And again, this isn't just for the oil and gas industry. This can apply to any industry when you're trying to reduce your GHGs, whether it's methane, CO2, or otherwise, right? What are your thoughts on some things that we should be focused on so that we're not always just talking about this on webinars in boardrooms at the regulator, but actually on the front line, kind of like we did with safety in Canada and the oil industry over the last couple of decades? How do you make this front of mind for your frontline workers?
Boy, that's a good question. And I think this dovetails well with the message I had as SPE president. As a farmer, think about the crop, think about the animal, think about the critter around the wellhead you design. And maybe you're in Stavanger dealing with something way down hole and a cement integrity thing down on your second string. I don't care. Around the water cooler, you need to talk about the environment. You need to talk about the critter. And I'm just thrilled and hopeful that the industry, the awareness is starting, and it's starting with the young generation. In the SPE, we called it the young professionals. And it's a different group of people. It's not Art and Darcy and Bill from Calgary and Houston. It's a whole bunch of different people and different gender and different color and shape and size. And under 35, they're thinking differently. They want to share a wall with somebody else. They want to ride their bicycle. They want to do things differently. And I'm so hopeful that the future looking ahead is so strong. I look at some of the known SPE members on this call. I see Colleen is with us from Halifax. I see Audrey, who's been a champion for years, is with us from Calgary. These, the Audreys and the Colleens, there's a shout out. They're the people that are the new industry. They're not Art and Buck and Herb from Houston and Calgary. And I have such hope because people are thinking so differently. They're thinking efficiency, and they're thinking about their atmosphere and their water. And this, I think, is going to shift our industry dramatically, and I'm seeing it from the drilling and completion side. So I have a really hopeful, optimistic outlook.
All right. With that, just in the spirit of trying to keep us on time, I want to, just before I hand it back to you, James, for your quick closing, I want to again thank my panelists. Thank you very much for especially getting up early. We're all in the mountain time zone. And I want to thank again James for the opportunity of hosting this webinar. I think it was really good. There was one more question that came across on the chat that we aren't going to have time to get to, but I'll plant the seed with James. This could be an entirely new webinar. And it ties actually to the opening question we had from Bruce, but this one says, differing methodologies in each jurisdiction is a problem. Can the panel comment on the development and acceptance of a single standard? This is the only way to effectively compare performance across jurisdictions, right? So again, like I said, we could easily fill up a 90-minute webinar just on that topic. So James, I'll leave that with you as an idea if GMI is looking for future panel opportunities. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to James Diamond for any closing comments. And I want to thank everybody, especially the team behind the scenes at Tetra Tech, for making this go so seamlessly. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mark. I think I won't take too much time echoing what you're saying in terms of both the panelists and Tetra Tech, both for this webinar and for the series over the course of the year. But to you especially for helping bring it together and run things through in a timely fashion today. It's great that we can gather together virtually, but it presents the kind of challenges that we wouldn't face or lack of opportunities that would obviously continue as this meeting closes. The hallway conversations would be continuing for the day if this group was together, I'm sure, and you can see the questions coming. We'll be posting information on the GMI website, so you'll see this material. You'll see contact information, and you've got the ability to contact us either through the GMI email address, or you're seeing on the slide right now the Secretariat address for GMI. One note that I wanted to make, there was reference to landfill gas. So GMI is not only oil and gas. We're the oil and gas subcommittee making this presentation. Landfill gas, biogas, coal bed, methane are all primary issues for the Global Methane Initiative, and you'll see it reflected through the website and through other subcommittees. I think there's one or two more slides. Well, maybe not. So I'll leave you now with the idea to the first slides that we presented, saying only that this wraps up the year following the inability that we had to hold the forum. There are more meetings coming up generally for GMI. Stay aware and look for the information coming to you. Mark, I don't have any specific webinars, seminars set up for next year, but I think certainly we'll be pursuing it because we can see the interest that we generate as we bring together this audience. So thanks again to you, all the panelists, Tetra Tech, EPA for helping put this together, and hopefully we'll see you all soon. Thank you.